Okay, well, I'm going to make a start because I value everyone's time here on LinkedIn Live and also joining us on the Zoom call today. Um, so let's make a start and see who joins in as we get going. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for your time in attending today's live event, this webinar. I really do appreciate your attendance. I know that everyone is super busy and there are lots and lots of events to attend. So I hope to make this worthwhile for you. And of course, I'd value your feedback at the end of the event. Okay, so we're here today for Secrets of the Unicorns. It's great to see science and technology founders here. I'm going to be talking through this afternoon the work I've found, the insights I've found from working with founders over the past 2 decades to turn breakthrough research into real world impact. I'll be sharing with you the things that I've found that I find particularly interesting and valuable to early stage science and technology founders. And one of the main things that I've found is that so many science startups struggle, not because the science isn't good enough, but because the path to commercial traction isn't clear. So today I'm going to share with you the commercialization pattern that I see in the startups that successfully move from breakthrough to traction and investment. We'll start off by having a look at why so many technology startups struggle to secure early customers. We'll then go through the 3 traction milestones that investors are looking for before they put forward an offer for funding. We'll look at how to turn pilots and early interest into real commercial momentum. And finally, practical ways to position complex technologies so that investors truly understand your value. Now, this session is designed specifically for early stage science and deep tech founders who want to accelerate their path from innovation towards impact. So whether you're building a university spin-out, a deep tech startup, an early stage science venture, you'll leave today with a clearer roadmap for turning your breakthrough into customers, traction, and investment. And at the end of the session, I will also be introducing the Unicorn Builders Community, a new initiative designed to support science founders in applying these principles to their own startups. So my overall agenda for today's workshop, it's timed at 1.5 hours, but I expect that we'll finish probably earlier than that, also depending on how many questions you have, but hopefully I can give you back some of your working day at the end. So we're going to start up looking at the problem, why brilliant startups struggle to get traction. We're going to then go through the 3-step traction framework to impress investors. We're then going to go through the insights I've found, the secret commercialization framework that unicorns use. Oh, there we go. And finally, the new initiative I'm outlining, new support to win customers and secure investment. But before we start digging into the real content here, I just want to take a little moment to introduce myself. Now, this workshop isn't about me, but I thought it would be useful for me to at least set the scene and give you some context as to who I am and how I feel qualified to speak to you today. So why I do this at PBM Consulting as a chief problem solver here is that I'm fundamentally driven by a passion for science and technology to make a difference in the world, to create impact, to solve problems, not just create publications that sit on shelves and create dust. I've been doing this for over 2 decades, creating value from innovation, working with innovators from the public and the private sectors in creating real world impact from their innovation. I'm a born helper, as you'll probably see throughout this presentation, and the support that I provide. I love to sort of answer difficult questions and support technology founders in their very difficult journey at the early stages to establish that vital market traction and secure investment. And as you'll see from the way this presentation is laid out and the things that we're going to be talking through, I'm really fundamentally against the kind of the broken rules of the technology investment game and the way things are currently done. And I'm determined to make a difference to change that, to tear up those rules of how science and technology founders go about fundraising and building ventures of significant impact. And my track record, since I've been out on my own as PBM Consulting, is securing over £160 million worth of funding for my clients since I started just over 5 years ago. So that's me. The other thing I need to define before we start is the organizations we're talking about. And this is my somewhat controversial definition, because it's a personal bugbear, really, that when we think about technology startups, we immediately think of information technology only. And that's far too narrow a definition for me. Technology for me is any product or service that has a technological component. It could be digital, but it could have a physical component as well. And that's levels harder. For me, technology is the true definition is the application of knowledge. And it's those founders trying to build a viable, flourishing and growing company based on the application of new scientific or technological knowledge that most interest me. And these companies most face the issues we're going to be discussing today. Now, in revealing some of these secrets of the unicorns, I'm going to be using a number of examples from some of the biggest companies in the world today and examining in more detail their early stage journey, how they got started. And these companies come from, the examples I'm going to be using, come from the pharmaceutical sector, the software industry, the hospitality sector, financial technology, fintech, and also the space sector. And the framework that's going to emerge from all the great work these giant companies did at the very start of their journeys is valid for any new breakthrough innovation, regardless of the sector that they're in. Now, we know that getting a technology company to really take off is hard. It's really hard. Not only have you got to start a company and do all the things that other non-science and technology companies have got to do, but you've got to build something that's brand new. You've got to build an offer that customers really, really need, as opposed to just want and could be a throwaway, something that they can't live without. You've also got to develop and test a brand new product. You've got to finance its development and testing, and we'll do all of this until it's ready to sell. And the current sad reality of starting a science and technology startup is that 9 out of every 10 technology startups fail, taking with them the dreams and the hopes their founders had for starting the company in the first place. And what really makes me concerned and ever so slightly angry is that these rules are the set of rules that the technology investment game that investors they set them and they seem happy to play by them. They accept that out of every 10 companies funded, one will flourish to a level that will cover the losses of the other 9 that fail. And for me, that means good science hasn't fulfilled its potential in the world to solve problems. And it means that these founders, 9 out of 10 of them, not seeing their ultimate vision for their startup realized. So I think it's time we rewrote those rules. Don't you? So let's examine the problem. As the great man Einstein once said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. Now, we're not going to spend 55 minutes on the problem today, but that's at least where we're going to start. So I'm just going to do a quick poll here. I can't see exactly who's listening, but I will ask the poll anyway. To put your answers, if you're watching on Zoom, just click the right button. If you're watching on LinkedIn Live, just put your answer to this poll in the chat. So my question to you is, what's the current biggest challenge that your startup is facing right now? Is it finding your first customers? Is it explaining the value of your startup to investors? Is it getting that traction with investors? Is it defining your market focus, finding your true value in the world? Or is it something else? If so, just write that into the chat. Now I'll leave that up for a minute. Because of the way LinkedIn Live works, it's very difficult for me to check the chat as we go along. So I'll just leave that with you for a moment before we go into some of the insights that I've found on how, or particularly why, brilliant startups struggle to get that traction. And while you're doing that, I'll have a quick sip of water. Okay. So we'll just leave that there for a second and see how you're getting on after the event, because I can't see anything on LinkedIn Live the way this is all set up. But hey ho, we will press on regardless. So let's look, shall we, at the reasons why brilliant startups struggle to get traction. What are the issues that are preventing these 9 out of every 10 companies from becoming a unicorn, or at the very least, a flourishing company? Point 1. Many founders spend too much time explaining what their technology is, how it works, instead of the true value that it brings, either to customers or to investors. And let's look at the facts here. Investors very rarely fund on the basis of the science alone. They fund a credible path to customers. And we're going to spend a lot more time looking at investors' mindset a little bit later on. But that's the first point. Founders whose stories to the world focus on the technology and the innovation and how different it is, instead of the true value that it brings. Point 2, the customer discovery process is starting too late for many startups. They typically engage with customers far too late in the cycle and probably try to raise money too soon. So they missed out on this kind of building with the customer, which at the early stages is absolutely critical. I'm not sure why this is, but this is something that seems to be happening again and again. This kind of building in private until the startup feels they've got a product or a service that the world might want, and then trying to launch it, instead of customers being involved in the service creation activity before launch. Point 3 is the market positioning of the startup is unclear. It isn't immediately obvious what the pressing problem the startup solves is, and how the startup solution offers a step change in improvement. And point 4, a symptom possibly of founders trying to raise investment too early, perhaps because they're running out of funds, they're running out of money, but also failing to understand just what it is that investors are looking for. And if an investor is coming back to you and asking from you to return when you've got more traction, what they're saying in effect is, we don't believe, or you haven't shown us that the market really needs the product or service that you're trying to launch. And this traction gap is the number one thing that prevents good startups from getting that early investment. So let's have a look at it, this traction gap. Let's have a bit of time examining it. Where is it in this process that founders are failing to convince investors of their startup's potential? So this diagram here, let's just say we're wildly generalizing here, but if this is the typical journey of a science and technology startup, from the research phase into the stage of having an early prototype, into a pilot with a customer, to the stage of getting significant market traction, enough that it would be suitable to convince an investor to put their money into the startup. Where do we think the issue is? Now, the stage that most technology founders stall is here, in between the early pilots with customers and the market traction of getting considerable numbers of companies or customers to sign up. And the typical reasons for this traction gap are things like an unclear customer problem being stated, a weak positioning of their solution as to how it is a step change improvement to solving this problem. And it is the fact that pilots are just not converting to longer term contracts, or the digital equivalent, free users that sign up are never converting to paid users. And as I'm going to demonstrate in the unicorn case studies we're going to be taking a look at, traction is not accidental. Getting it is a structured process. And what does it look like? Well, I know that what I'm about to show you may make it look like this is an easy process, but often it isn't. And I totally understand that. But what is key is that it is a simple process. The steps are repeatable and proven. There are 3 steps in this traction framework. Step 1 is identifying the highest value problem that your startup is solving. And founders must really answer, who in the world urgently needs this? What costly problem does it solve? And this is because the fastest traction obtained in the market is usually from focusing on one very painful problem. Step 2, to secure that early validation, this is pilot customers, letters of intent, early partnerships, companies that see and recognize the true value of your startup and are willing to go along in the journey with you to create the final product. This validation is what what reduces investor risk dramatically. Step 3 is then to translate that traction into investor confidence. And obviously that sounds massively easy. It's obviously not. But what we're looking for here is, what we're looking in this stage, this step, is to provide investors with the sort of signals they're looking for. Credible market demand, not just hockey stick graphs that every startup in the world will put in front of investors. They're looking for evidence, looking for proof. And that proof can come in the form of repeatable sales conversations, and also from understanding and presenting clearly your key metrics. Things like customer acquisition costs, how much it costs for you to acquire a new customer, and the lifetime value of those customers as well. They're looking for real customer engagement, evidence of customers referring other people to you, that kind of organic growth. And even that small amount of traction can transform your fundraising story, because it gives investors the proof they're looking for, that the market really needs and will pay for what solution you're developing. Now, we could spend, and I have in the past, spent hours on how to approach investors and how investors think. And whilst it's true that there are many different types of investors out there, and in your search for the ideal best investor for your startup, it is important to know the differences and what each individual investor is looking for. There is at least one thing that all investors have in common. And exploiting this knowledge is what would-be unicorns really hone in on when they present their offer for consideration. What is that? What do they value most? And these elements that investors value have come from the conversations I've been having with hundreds of investors since I started the company. And the key takeaway here is that the most important thing is for you to be able to, as a founder, to be able to sell the size of the market problem you're solving. And this is fundamentally a much better way to attract investor interest, rather than focusing on the other elements, which we'll get to later on, which are lower down the priority list for investors. And your ability to tell a compelling narrative, an emotionally engaging story around your startup and the why it exists, what problem in the world it is solving, is the one skill that all investors have said is the skill that founders should most master if they want to attract their interest and attract their ultimate investment. Now, sadly, a lot of the stories and pitches that I've seen in doing this for over 25 years now focuses on what actually is the lowest priority for customers and investors, which is the innovativeness or uniqueness of their technology. And one of my favorite kind of sayings is that you should never underestimate how little an investor or customer cares about your technology or understands about your technology. This is not what grabs them, like a social media post that stops them scrolling. As sexy and unique as your technology is, it just isn't. Not for customers and not for investors. It is those companies that are able to tell a compelling story of the large, pressing, and growing problem that they solve in the world are the ones that get backed by customers and investors and go on to become unicorns. Lower down the priority list, or next on the priority list, is the ability of the startup to be able to show how their solution is a step change from what's currently out there. Third, of lower importance than that, is the fundamental makeup of the team of the startup. I know this is a slightly contentious point, especially in very early stage investments like business angels, where it's often been said that the investors are investing in the team above everything else. I would go to say that the team is a fundamental important part of this, but not as important as being able to show that this addresses a large enough and growing problem in the market. And finally, the least important thing in terms of your ability to attract those early customers to get market traction and those early investors is the innovativeness of your technology. Now, obviously, to become successful, you need to have all four in place. So you need to be able to tell a compelling story of the large and pressing problem you solve, articulate how your solution is a step change from what's currently out there, is led by a world-class team, and is bringing innovative technology to the market. If you can do all that, then you're going to be one of the ones that are able to be backed by customers and investors and become future unicorns. So let's go and look at some of these examples, bring this into reality for you, and looking at some of these companies we're going to be focusing on for the rest of this afternoon. Here are some examples of companies and their initial big story positioning statements that they've used. So you've got Moderna, a new way to create medicines across many diseases. So moving them away from focusing on one particular disease, but instead positioning themselves as a platform to create multiple cures and medicines for multiple diseases. That's from the pharma space. Let's look at the software space. A massive unicorn, Palantir. Their initial positioning: reduce terrorism while preserving civil liberties. So these are kind of the ultimate headline grabbing, interest grabbing positioning statements that these unicorns have used. To take one that you're probably very all familiar with, if the slides will let me, Airbnb, their initial positioning statement to the world: unlocking underutilized space worldwide. Again, you'll notice they're not focusing on what they do or how they do it, but why they exist, their overall purpose, the problem they're solving. Stripe, focusing on the real problem that they identified and brought to investors' attention, that payments infrastructure is holding back internet businesses. And last but not least, using the example from the space sector, and probably one of the biggest, if you like, and most grand statements, SpaceX's initial positioning statement of make humanity multi-planetary. And we could focus on things like Apple as well and their think different approach, setting out their stall as to why people should be interested in what they're doing rather than what products they make or how they do it. So hopefully you'll notice that what's core throughout these 5 examples is the grand nature, the kind of compelling narrative that they've created around their initial offer to the market. It's not what the technology is, it's not how they do it, it's why they exist, the problem they're solving. So let's look in a little bit more detail now at some of these 5 unicorns to pick apart the secrets that they can teach us from their early stages, from their kind of getting started phases. And this will create what I'm going to be promoting, which is the commercialization framework that these unicorns use in the early stages of their development. So let's look at our first case study, Moderna. So obviously now this is a company worth 20 billion US dollars in the pharmaceutical sector. The biggest problem they wanted to highlight to investors at the early stage was that traditional drug development is incredibly slow and incredibly costly. And they positioned what they had, which was mRNA, as a platform technology, as this new way to create medicines across many diseases. Excuse me. Itchy nose. They built a number of strategic partnerships from the start. Early work with pharmaceutical companies like AstraZeneca and Alexion Pharmaceuticals. They collaborated with government, and they built that early validation in what they were doing, their overall approach, through these partnerships. And these early partnerships, these strategic partnerships, validated their approach, their science, and in the case of DARPA, the US funding agency, provided grant financing as well. And these strategic partnerships continued over their first few early years of existence with Merck and with Vertex Pharmaceuticals, and then more lately working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as well. The third step they did was smart money raising. They identified these key biotech-savvy strategic investors to secure the long-term capital they were looking for. They got serious with creating a profile of the right investors for deep tech, identifying biosavvy technology investors in their network, so not through direct messaging or randomly sending out pitch decks, to raise this long-term capital aligned with the investor's risk profile. And between the first few years of their existence, between 2011 and 2017, they raised $2 billion US dollars in venture capital funding. And the only way they were able to do that was by bringing in relevant investors aligned to their ideal investor persona that were in their network. And if you look at the overall timeline of their kind of initial growth, it was in their first 5 years, they launched their first product, and it was only 3 years later that they actually went to the initial product offering and launched onto the stock market. So the key takeaways, from this unicorn case study, the key secrets are that they framed their offer as a platform, not as a product. They built in concert with strategic partners, and they raised from investors who understood their particular field. Next case study, Palantir. Again, this is now a huge company, 370 billion US dollars in the software sector. So the big idea they set out to solve was that large organizations in the US couldn't use their data effectively. And in high stakes environments such as defense and intelligence, they positioned themselves as a kind of a mission critical solution with this overall positioning statement of reducing terrorism while preserving civil liberties, connecting previously siloed databases to support intelligence operations, counterterrorism analysis, law enforcement, and enterprise analytics. So they had that big problem statement to launch with. Step 2, they built alongside their customer. They conducted deep co-development in the solution development stages, getting embedded within government agencies to solve real operational challenges. So they didn't have a finished product offer that they went to the market with. Instead, they built alongside their customers. And for 2 years, they continuously refined their technology based on the demands of real customers and real analysts from the intelligence agencies, introduced to them by their first investor, In-Q-Tel. So they weren't selling, they were co-creating solutions. The third point is the smart fundraising. Now, they were obviously very lucky that they were able to attract some initial funding from one of the founders, Peter Thiel, initially, but secured some really critical early in stage investment from In-Q-Tel, which was with the sole purpose of getting them in touch with prospective users. So it wasn't on marketing or product development or other things that I typically see many founders ask for in their pitches. They had a specific goal in mind for what to use this early funding for, and that was to do the co-development with customers that they obviously intended to do. And the other thing that this initial investor helped them with was introductions to future investment from other investors as well, Reed Elsevier or REV. And they helped them overcome this initial opposition to what they were doing, which was described as an investment software platform for large organizations, and instead focused on the long-term value of what they were trying to do, aligned to their initial positioning. So they had really strong founder and investment alignment. So what can we learn from this? They worked closely with high-value customers from day one. They solved critical problems, and their solution development was aligned to solving those real-life problems. And they chose investors who aligned really well with their overall mission. The next one, which is 3 out of 5, Airbnb. So a huge company now, $79 billion in the travel and hospitality sector. How did they set out their initial positioning? As I mentioned, to unlock underutilized space worldwide. So their big idea was to solve the problem that hotels were expensive and inflexible, whilst there was this massive amount of spare capacity in homes around the world that was being unused. And obviously they put the two and two together in a global marketplace opportunity with the overall slogan of unlocking this underutilized space worldwide. Secondly, they again built in concert with the customer. The initial founders hosted guests themselves. They met users face to face. They focused on niched events to really gain a face-to-face understanding of what the market was looking for. And this was reflected in their product development. And by March 2009, so again, the first couple of years, they had 10,000 users and 2,500 listings. So they built organically in concert with early users, with their customers. Again, their third step relating to fundraising, all around persistence and using their network. They were rejected by many investors initially. They actually went down the accelerator route with Y Combinator, which provided them with training and about $20,000 in funding in exchange for 6% of the company, which is a huge amount of money in their current value. And they built relationships with key investors, introduced them from the accelerator in exchange for their funding. So, key takeaways from Airbnb, their secrets: start with a small, really focused market, learn directly from users, so building it alongside users, and that they needed to show an amount of traction before they could get investments on board. So this traction kind of was the key to unlocking the confidence in investors in them. Case study 4 is Stripe. So this is fintech, huge fintech company, $159 billion market cap. And the initial problem that they were solving was that online payments from many companies were fragmented and complex, and developers were struggling to integrate payment systems with their websites. And they described this as a global economic bottleneck, this payment infrastructure that's holding back internet businesses. Strong positioning statement based all around the problem they're solving in the world. Step 2 was building with the customer. They were starting small, learning fast. They put the founders themselves personally onboarded early users. They focused on developers and startups and iterated based on the real sort of integration gains and benefits that they were seeing from working alongside those customers. And that early traction came from that really deep understanding of who their users were and what they wanted from the solution. So they were designing it alongside their customer. When it came to investment, their approach was to raise from the right people. So they were founded in 2010. They got their first investment only a year later, $2 million dollar investment from approaching high net worth individuals with a key understanding of their approach to this problem. Elon Musk, PayPal founder Peter Thiel, Irish entrepreneur Liam Casey, and early venture capital firms as well. And again, from the Y Combinator network, they got some warm introductions to the type of investors they were looking for, who understood the kind of growth opportunity in the market to solve this problem. So their takeaways, again, translate these technical problems that they saw or identified in the world into big market stories to attract their interest from customers, users, and investors. Build directly with early users and raise from those investors who really understood their world, their problem, the markets that they were facing, they were working in. And our last case study, SpaceX, which is one of the, I think, is the world's most valuable private company, 800 billion market cap. So when they started off, they had this huge statement, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. This bold problem that they were trying to set out to solve was that space travel was prohibitively expensive. And organizations like NASA relied on very costly legacy systems. So their approach was very different. And this bold vision of making humanity multi-planetary helps people sort of think about a larger vision than what was currently being obtained, because they had a different approach to how space vehicles could be developed. This kind of vertical integration of inexpensive commercial off-the-shelf components, a modular approach aligned to modern software engineering, and cutting launch costs dramatically through this approach. Again, like our other case studies, they built with the customer early on. They obviously, the sector they're in, were able to unlock huge amounts of federal funding and contracts for their early launches from the Department of Defense, for example, through NASA. They iterated their approach through real missions, some of them in very visible failures, but they carried on and got their approach and their model refined through working with those early stage grant investors. And then finally, when it came to fundraising, again, this is all about strategic capital, about having an aligned vision between the investors and the vision that the founders had set out for the company. And became a unicorn in 2012, so very early on in their lifetime cycle. And at the time, had private equity funding of about a fifth of their overall value, $200 million, with that coming half from the world's richest man now, as he now is, investing half of that, and other investors putting in an equal amount. But their proof points that future investors were looking for were provided by these government contracts that they held. And that, again, echoes a point that I've often made to clients I've worked with, is that grant funding is not only a way of providing funding that doesn't need to be repaid, but is a key way of establishing that kind of market traction and the proof that this is a viable solution to a big problem in the market that future investors would look towards. So that big vision, attracting attention, working with those early partners for grant funding to provide that powerful validation for future investors, and then the execution of these contracts was what gave the future investors the confidence to invest in them. So very quickly, and I'll take a quick breather, very quickly taking you through the case studies of 5 unicorns, and we've examined how they first started. And what that has allowed us to do is to pick out 3 activities that these companies did at an early stage, which form the basis of what many unicorns consistently do. Number 1 is that they tell this big story, the market problem they're solving. That's not focusing on the technology, but on the scale and size of the problem and the market opportunity that's out there. They built alongside customers at the early stages so that this early traction is co-created rather than building in secret and launching and having to sort of backpedal and catch up with the market needs. You build it alongside with the participation of early stage customers. And again, they raise money from the right people who are aligned to their overall vision for the problem that they're solving. Warm introductions, aligned investors, contacts from their network, rather than this kind of random approach to spraying and praying to any investor who's out there, which many technology founders fall into the very bad habit of doing. So at this point, technology issues notwithstanding, I was going to just briefly pause, and before we go into the final section describing the commercialization framework, I was just going to pause and see if there are any questions either on Zoom or LinkedIn. But the way that the LinkedIn Live is working for me tonight, I can't really see any questions coming through, so I'll just briefly pause it here. But if there are questions and you're watching this later on LinkedIn Live that you wanted to ask around traction, around positioning, around getting those early pilots, or investment readiness, getting ready to present to investors, then please go ahead and put them into the chat and I can get back to you on a one-to-one basis. Okay. I have no idea what's happening with Zoom. I was expecting about 30 people today and I can't see many on the Zoom, but hey ho, we are pressing on. The final section is really bringing together the lessons that these unicorns have taught us from their early stage activities to secure market traction and investment. And what it's allowed us to do is to unpick these secrets of the unicorns and put this together into this commercialization framework that these unicorns and many others have used at the early stages to get that kind of traction, to build the credibility and secure future rounds of investment that I hope that we can all make use of if we're starting a science and technology startup. And this is really the sole focus of the support that I want to provide, because this is what I know is needed. This ability to tell a bigger story around your offer and around the problem that you're solving. The problems that many founders have with building early with customers to engage these early users, to run pilots and get that validation that future investors are looking for, and refine their offer in concert with early users. And then the final stage, which is a key focus of mine, which is this kind of laser targeted engagement of investors who are aligned to the real problem you're solving in the market. This use of warm introductions and referrals, the methods that do work to attract the right investors, leveraging that and showing them the evidence of traction that you've got. These three focuses of support is what I'm going to be focusing on as a support provider going forward, with the sole outcome of getting you, the science and technology founders, the traction, building your credibility, and securing the investment. Now, the reason why I want to focus on this a little bit and look at this as the big picture, that there's a trap that many founders seem to fall into, perhaps because they're faced with such, very pressing pressures of running out of money. But the trap they fall into is of making investment their sole focus, forgetting that the investors are not funding great ideas, they're funding these credible paths to customers. And the contentious statement deliberately I'm making, which I know is probably impractical in many cases, but is a way of thinking about how you grow your startup, where you consider that the best investor for you is no investor at all. And I know that is deliberately contentious, and there are many reasons why that is not the case, and you can't just rely on orders from the market and fulfilling your development gap that you have for your funding. But if you make it your focus, meeting the needs of the market, solving problems for customers, and securing income from them, if you make that and always make that your number one priority, then you'll have the right focus that investors are looking for, that demonstrates and evidences the market traction, which is the one thing that investors are looking for in order to fund your startup. Now, obviously, there are a number of options as a science and technology founder looking for a significant investment to grow their company, building on established traction that you've got. There obviously are these technology investment brokers that are out there, which I jokingly described many times as the estate agents of investment. They've got a big black book of investors, they've got a big black book of companies, and they smush them together and hope that deals come out from them. And the good news is that, they do provide really good support to get a deal done. The kind of due diligence process, negotiation, forming contracts, heads of terms, etc. But the bad news is that they don't often get the most optimal deal for the founder, because let's face it, they are mainly paid by the people who are investing into their fund. And although they don't require you to put upfront funding their way, they will put a huge bill once you're successful in securing your investment of between 5 to 7.5% of the finances that you raise. Similarly, accelerators have their good and bad points as well. The good that you'll learn the techniques to be successful in the market. You'll get some much needed cash in some cases. Sometimes that's often the value of the support you get rather than pure cash, but that does depend on the accelerator program. And you get to pitch to investors at the end. But are those investors the right ones for you? What are the chances of your ideal investor being in the room for the final demo day from the accelerator program? Very, very low. Also, good accelerator programs are very competitive. It takes months and months to join them. It's an elaborate and competitive process to go through. And for all this, they do end up taking away, as we heard from one of the case studies, taking 4% equity in their company, which at an early stage is very expensive for you. Even if you don't have a deal, that still applies. Your third option, of course, is to go it alone, which is, on paper, the cheapest option, right? The traditional method, though, of creating a pitch deck and a business plan, sending it out to investors, sitting and waiting for the bait to be taken and the phone to ring, can work. It does often take an awful long time, 18 to 24 months, an awful lot of effort, up to sort of half of your time spent doing this. And it's got about a 6,000 to 1 chance of working alone, this kind of spraying and praying approach to all the investors that are out there. And what can happen in those 18 to 24 months is obviously competitors could beat you to the punch, you could run out of money, many things could happen. And you are on your own. There's no support available to this. So although it may seem like the cheapest option, if it takes you 2 years of your life, is it really? So again, another opportunity for you to give me your feedback in terms of polls. Of these options, using an investment broker, going down the path of joining an accelerator program, going it alone and starting to email pitch decks out left, right, and center, working with a consultant or a coach or any other form of support. I'll leave this poll out there. Again, if you're watching this on LinkedIn Live, just put the number of your particular form of support that you're using into the chat. And I will pause and take a breather while you're doing that. And I'm really generally interested to see, what options are more favored by people, because for many, the brokerage route offers a no risk approach. If they are prepared to sacrifice that for the 5 to 7.5% of the overall deal. And the accelerator programs, if you can get into one and it doesn't take you years of your life, and again, they provide that vital support in the program to follow to validate your offer in the market, to get that early engagement and early market traction. And there is a chance that the investor mates of the accelerator program invited to the demo day will be interested in funding your company, but it's a considerably less chance than if you conducted your own laser targeted search for your own ideal aligned investor, as these unicorn case studies have done. Now, obviously, getting the support to get your fundraising right is vital. This feels like a massive understatement for me to say, but the real price of getting your approach wrong, is multiple. I mean, there's a high chance if you get the options wrong that you'll run out of money before you secure your next funding round. That you could get investment without support and to follow a defined process, it could take you years. And in that time, people could beat you to the punch, get a product on the market, make yours obsolete. And obviously, all that time you're risking your own personal energy, burnout, loss of team members as the journey goes on, and impacting on your family life and health as well. Let's not forget the personal investment of time, energy, and resources into this as your startup is trying to raise funding. And ultimately, you risk achieving the ultimate vision that you set out with for your startup. And this happens again and again. A company I know has spent 4 years trying to secure funding for their idea. 4 years of incurring costs without generating any income. I mean, what could happen to your concept if it takes that long to generate commercial interest? What would happen to you personally? So this is something that I want founders to get right, because I don't want to see this continual 9 out of 10 science and technology startups failing. These are the reasons why I exist, to help change that balance, to make more technology companies successful. So let's kind of crystal ball gaze a little bit about the type of support that could really benefit you as a science and technology founder. What if this type of support existed? What if you had a wish list of the type of support that you would need to secure your next investment, secure that early market traction from customers? Would it look like this? Would this be on your wish list? Would it, for a start, would it not require you to give away equity or a huge chunk of the funding that you secure to a third party? Would it be truly affordable, even for early pre-revenue startups? It would need to be expert support using proven approaches, but also the support uniquely should be flexible enough to adapt to your circumstances, your own personal journey, your motivations, and your sector. So, just as a show of hands, how many of you would think that that kind of support would be useful to your science and technology startup? If it is, then type the word wish list into the comments, and I'll review this afterwards when my computer would allow me to see what's going on LinkedIn Live and see what sort of level of support there is out there for this type of support. And I've used the word support far too many times. What interest is there out there amongst the viewing audience for this type of support, should it exist? Because, and again, this is the final part of today's webinar. This is what I'm working towards. I'm launching on Wednesday, 1st of April, the Unicorn Builders Community, a place to provide the source of support to grow a highly impactful science and technology company. Because I've been doing webinars like this and working with founders for over 5 years now, and I can consistently get the same sort of questions, which are, how do we apply this kind of framework, this commercialization framework that we just outlined, whilst building your startup? And that's what I want to provide in the Unicorn Builders community. So through the community, I'll be providing bite-sized commercialization training along the lines of those 3 pillars of support: the telling a bigger story, the building alongside it and building that early validation with customers, and laser-targeted fundraising. Providing bite-sized online training to support you with your efforts in those 3 areas. I'll be doing live Q&A sessions from myself and also from other support providers with knowledge in this area. You can get your real-time questions about support you're looking for to build your own personal impact for your science and technology company from live sessions. I'll be providing practical tools, examples, templates, processes ways of working that are aligned with those three areas of how to tell that bigger story of your company that attracts interest from customers and investors, how to secure that early traction from early stage customers that provide you with the evidence that investors will be looking for, and how to carry out an investment search that is targeted along with your ideal investor persona, rather than randomly spraying out your pitch deck to anyone who you can find on the internet. And the other elements that I'm really excited as this community grows is learning from each other. It's the support provided from all of you, from people who have been there and done that for yourselves, the lessons you've learned, the practical expertise that you have from journeys you are currently taking, that support you can provide others. And I think that uniquely can be provided in this community because it has one focus on securing that market traction and that early stage investment in science and technology companies. So I think I'm going to leave you with, and I was right, we're going to finish pretty early, so I can give you back some of your afternoons. If today's session has been useful to you, and you want ongoing support applying this to your own startup, then I'd love to invite you to join the Unicorn Builders community. Your choice, really, along the lines of the options we just talked about, is either to spend 18 to 24 months of your life going it alone, to give away 5 to 7.5% of the funds you raise to a broker, or give away 3 to 4% of your company's equity to an accelerator program, or pay £25 a month to join this community. Let me put this another way. To secure the future growth of your startup, would you be willing to invest the equivalent of 1 cup of takeaway coffee every week? And as a thank you for those who are watching this webinar today, I hope some of you are, through the wonders of the technology that we're trying to work with. As a thank you for your time in attending, and to be the first to join the Unicorn Builders community, I want you to take advantage of an offer I'm putting together, a welcome offer for you when paying to join the community. Now, if you sign up for the whole year, you get 3 months free. So there's 2 options available to you. So to join this Unicorn Builders community, you can scan in this QR code on the screen. I'll leave it up there. Or you can click the link in chat, which if I had access to the chat, I'll be able to do. I will just try and do that now as we speak. It's done. There are 2 links that I posted into the chat. One is a link to join the Unicorn Builders community, and the other is to book a short call with me if you want to talk it through in person, a link to a 15-minute call with me. So the choice really is yours. An expensive cup of coffee a week, or targeted support to help you secure your next investment and the growth of your company. What are you going to spend £25 on? So again, the last thing I'll ask you to do, if you're watching this on LinkedIn Live, just to test the waters, to see how you're all feeling, how many of you would be willing to secure this type of support? Type in the words "build a unicorn" into the comment section of LinkedIn Live or to the Zoom, and we can take it from there. So for now, I've kept to my promise and given you back some of your afternoons. I'd like to thank you again for your time in watching this webinar. And again, if today's session has been useful and you want ongoing, targeted, flexible support applying the framework we've talked about to your startup, I'd love to invite you to join me in the Unicorn Builders community. The link and the details are on your screen. Until next time, thank you very much.